In this video, we're going to unpack the book Yesteryear by Caro Burke from a mental health or specifically a codependency lens. My name is Krystal Mazzola Wood, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and author with various books, including 2 on codependency recovery. This book, Yesteryear, while it is such a fascinating, fun read in my opinion, it is also a really interesting exploration of the way codependency can manifest in this really nuanced way that I don't think is always discussed. I really love the view of codependency as kind of existing on a spectrum. I trained under Pia Mellody, who wrote one of the seminal books on codependency called Facing Codependents. And in her model, the Meadows Model, she looks at how codependency can manifest in these different extremes. On one side of things, it's kind of the more traditionally thought of person who has codependency. They're the person who feels less than, they're really needy, they don't have boundaries. And that's, one presentation. But on the other side of things is someone who, because they feel so bad about themselves, like they feel so less than, they start to make up that they're better than other people. And they can make up they're better than other people for the way they look, how much money they have, their education. I mean, it really can be anything. I've met people who make up they're better than others because of how many drinks they can have more than others, like how they can drink other people under the table. So it can really be any reason we make up. And then these are people who are really walled off. They have really high boundaries. Instead of having no boundaries in codependency, you can also have too many walls up. And in this manifestation of codependency, you can have, also a mixed presentation. And I think Natalie in Yesteryear is a really fascinating character because at first I thought she was going to be more classically codependent. There was a lot of aspects of her where she was really all about performing, right? And in codependency, we really live from this sense of what other people need or want from us. And so our compass in the world is about what other people might want. It's really external. And so when we live from this perspective of needing to perform, we're living in a codependent way. If I think about how do other people want me to dress? How do they want me to speak? What do they want me to do for my work? How do they want me to look? That's all performing. And that's very codependent because when we're interdependent, we really think about what I need, what I want, what I value, and then we make our choices from there. And we think about what other people need and want, and we absolutely compromise wherever possible, but we don't negotiate what's non-negotiable. But we live from this really authentic, grounded place versus this place of performance, or also something that Natalie embodied that was very, what we think about with codependency a lot of the time. She was also very perfectionistic. I mean, even putting pressure on her child to smile properly to make other people feel comfortable, which is kind of that very classic presentation of codependency that I was thinking about. But then as I really thought about Natalie, I thought about how she really does have these walls up. And throughout the book, she really isn't connected to herself, which is a classic symptom of codependency. We don't know who we are. But she also doesn't really consider other people's personhood. She wants to fit them into a box of what makes her feel comfortable, what her belief systems are. For example, her sister or her mom, if they step out of what she thinks is right, which was even about how she was raised as well, then she's quick to criticize them, to want to control them, which is part of codependency. But she doesn't really perceive other people in their personhood. To be interdependent, we really have to think about who someone else is versus just projecting an idea onto them of who we wish they were to make us comfortable. And you see this throughout the novel with her husband. And I never got a sense of authentic love for him. I mean, even on their first date, her whole life was kind of a consequence of her first date just telling him that, her husband, that she wanted to live on a farm, but there was no sense of authentic connection to this. She didn't even remember that at first when he kept bringing up this dream. And you don't really get this sense of any sort of warmth or love for him, even in the beginning. It's really about who Caleb can be for her. And she's always trying to perform for other people too. And the same thing happens with her children. And I thought it was really interesting, because I was wondering like, oh, is this some postpartum, issues, like some postpartum depression? Not an area that I specialize in, but of course I have a little familiarity. But it wasn't really about that, because the lack of empathy was a pervasive quality within Natalie. It didn't just happen when she had her child. And I thought it was really interesting that the only child she found it was really easy to love was her last child. And her last child really never questioned Natalie at all, never was critical, always adoring, always wanting to connect with her, always seeing the best in her. And I think that it really speaks to how there can be this other presentation of codependency that is much more narcissistic. So research shows now that there are really two presentations of codependency. We think more of the grandiose ones. The grandiose ones are the people who are really entitled. They genuinely do think that they're more special than other people. They can be very abusive as well and manipulative. But then there's the vulnerable narcissists, and these are the people who feel less than, they don't feel good enough, so they cover it up with performance and trying to be special and trying to get lots of attention. And one of the things about this presentation is you kind of see it in the Meadows Model. You have the person who feels less than, they're really needy, they don't have any boundaries, but then you have the person who can be really controlling. They genuinely think that maybe their views are better than other people's. They're really walled off. They can be really kind of cold because of these walls, kind of like that, more avoidantly attached. And that is a presentation of codependency in the Meadows Model. So it's like this spectrum. And Natalie embodies this perfectionism, this sense of performance, but also this lack of empathy that reveals her to be codependent, but in a way that I don't think we always talk about, because she's really not needy. Rather, instead, she's really thinking about what she would want from other people and how to kind of put them in their place. There's a lot of that control, and control is a codependent symptom as well. And one of the things I really find interesting as I was reading Yesteryear was thinking about social media and its impact on our personalities. So Natalie already had her own traumas. She already had a lack of empathy. I think one of her key traumas was when her mom had her and her sister tell other people that their father was no longer with them, kind of as a euphemism perhaps, as he had passed on, that he had died, but in reality he had just moved out. But they didn't openly talk about that. And then later on you understand more about that story, and that is part of what leads to this real break from reality for Natalie. That you kind of get throughout the novel. But then, so you have this key trauma, but then you also have her social media use. So it fit in perfectly with her sense of performance, her sense of perfectionism, like, promoting the ranch, promoting this, traditional lifestyle that wasn't even real, but, for the attention, for the money, for the likes, for the approval. And, I was thinking about where, like, kind of that chicken or egg. Yes, she already had these narcissistic qualities within her. She was already existing on this spectrum. But then I think it's really interesting that social media use can encourage narcissistic traits. For example, there's a concept called narcissistic supply, where if a narcissist is using you in their life, they will use you for attention, for a sense of importance, for a sense of feeling special. Like they want you to dote on them, to compliment them, to think that their ideas are so fascinating, and they kind of feed on other people's attention, other people's approval, other people's desire. And that's that narcissistic supply. And kind of like what happens in narcissistic abuse cycles is someone will feed off of someone, manipulate them, take from them, and then eventually kind of get bored from that source of supply and then move on to someone else and kind of completely leave that original person behind. And that can be, that sense of devaluation can be incredibly painful and traumatic. But anyway, you're getting this sense of narcissistic supply for Natalie from the social media posts. And I wanted to do a little research on this. So there was actually a study in 2018 that found just 4 months of posting heavily on a visual social media site, like more like Instagram, not, X, for example. If it was a visually oriented social media site and you were posting, or app, you were posting frequently, in just 4 months, there was a 25% increase in narcissistic traits. And I think that that statistic should give us all pause, especially those of us who are, posting on social media or looking at social media, especially these visual sites. But then also, I think all of us collectively, there's a lot of conversation that's been happening for the last, at least couple years around wanting to build a community again, that there has been this dissolution of community that, like you go out, you really don't talk to anyone. Your neighbors don't speak to you. There's a loneliness epidemic. And I think a lot of people are craving offline experiences. They're craving an analog life. They're craving community. But then we kind of go into this collective where we've been using social media now kind of for at least a couple decades. And you can see that there is more narcissism collectively. And what I mean by that is narcissists, for example, feel really entitled. They want to feel special than other people. Some of them genuinely feel that way, and some of them, again, just want to feel better than because they feel not good enough. But you're seeing people cut line. You're seeing people, like the road rage where people aren't waiting for you to merge, even if you're coming on from like a freeway entrance. You're seeing people, feel entitled to the public space because sound, noise is a boundary, kind of like my rights end where your rights begin. But then there are people who are going out and they're not putting headphones on and they're listening to whatever they're listening to kind of on full blast for everyone else to hear, violating other people's sound boundaries, noise boundaries. And it's, and then there's this whole concept of other people being NPCs, like non-playing characters, like that if I don't know someone else, if they're just a random person in the community, then they're not really real. And that sort of mentality is incredibly dangerous. I even came across a video like a year ago where someone was saying that there are genuinely people who don't have like a sense of soul, for example, that there are people who they are walking around, but they're empty and they don't have the same personhood as the person who was speaking, and he was speaking to his audience, like you or me. And that kind of rhetoric is incredibly dangerous. Without empathy, without connection, without remembering that I am equal to you and you are equal to me, we get this dissolution of community. We get this loneliness epidemic. We get these mental health issues really kind of increasing in number. And I'm convinced, I've been a mental health therapist now, relationship therapist, for over 15 years. And I'm convinced now that a lot of mental health issues, depression and anxiety specifically, are really connected to a lack of relationship with others and a lack of relationship with ourselves. But that's probably a whole other conversation. But this increase in narcissism that we're seeing collectively, that social media, especially a visual site, just 4 months, 25% increase in narcissistic traits, is alarming. And I think it explains a lot of what we're seeing culturally. And then there's this whole other thing that, Yesteryear made me really think about. And that was our relationship with our creativity. And how content creation has really polluted so many of our relationships with our creativity. And I know there's lots of people who think, oh, I'm not creative. But I encourage you for a moment to think about your favorite activities as a child. And I know childhood is an uncomfortable time for plenty of people. So kind of imagine a tunnel. Imagine there's light at the end of the tunnel. And in that light, just go to the memories of your favorite activities as a child for a moment. Really think about what you loved to do as a kid. And when you think about that, a lot of common activities that people will say will be dancing and singing and coloring and drawing and writing and Legos and puzzles and crafting, baking. And what do all of those activities have in common? Our creativity. Even reading, if that was a favorite activity, that encourages your creativity. Video games, you start to creatively think about problems. You start to kind of put yourself in that world. And so our creativity is part of what makes us human. And I know there's more conversations around that, especially with AI now. But when our creativity is co-opted into this thing that exists for an audience, that exists for an algorithm, that's kind of like a slot machine too. You never know what you post, if someone's gonna see it or not, how many likes you're gonna get. And when you're creating for an audience, for the algorithm, and not for authentic self-expression, your sense of connection to your creativity becomes incredibly polluted. And research shows that creativity makes us happier. When we're creative, we're happier. When we're creative, we actually feel more connected to other people. It makes us feel less lonely. And so when our creativity has been siphoned from us as this thing that exists for performance, for approval, in this very codependent landscape, it really impacts our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with other people. And I encourage you to even think about, when was the last time you allowed yourself to create authentically? Maybe you baked a new recipe, you did a Lego set, you did puzzle, you put a puzzle together. When was the last time you created authentically? How did that make you feel? What was that like for you? And if you are creating, maybe you're creating visuals or graphics or art, when was the last time you created something that wasn't for an audience too? I would encourage you to think about, because especially for people who are business owners or have side businesses that, use their creativity like art or writing, I think there can become such a trap of only doing it for the algorithm, only doing it if there's going to be an audience. And that really impacts our relationship with ourselves. And you can see this throughout the novel of Yesteryear. Natalie really, I talked about the lack of empathy, but she has no sense of self-connection. And you see that play out in a really extreme way where she even loses touch with reality later on. And, her creativity did not exist for her. It existed for performance. It existed for the algorithm. It existed for an audience that she objectified and they objectified her, to talk about narcissism. And so my camera died, sorry. But I just encourage you to think about when you last created for you. And whether it was something that you allowed yourself to just do for you or for the audience or the algorithm. And finally, if it's been a long time since you've created authentically, I encourage you to think about reclaiming that even in the smallest way. I identify as a writer, but I had not been writing fiction for a long time. And in the last month, I started a practice of writing a haiku a day. And then I found this practice where it was like a haiga, I think it's called, where you then create a visual piece to go with that. And I just created a Pinterest board to represent the haiku I wrote. And so that was something as a writer I did. But maybe if you loved drawing, maybe a doodle a day, or just start now, just doodle now. Or, get yourself a puzzle set or a Lego set. But try to reclaim your sense of creativity for yourself, not an algorithm, not an audience, not performance. Because Yesteryear, of course, it's a very extreme interpretation of it, but it really shows how much it eats at us. It eats at our well-being if we do not have a sense of connection to ourselves authentically, which includes authentic self-expression and creativity. And so I really have, encourage you to reclaim your creativity, even in the smallest way. I'd love to hear how. I'd love to hear in the comments how you might be doing that, or your thoughts about creativity, your thoughts about Yesteryear. I talked about the spectrum of codependence. If you want to hear more about that, let me know. And then finally, I thought, like, for my creativity, something I love to do is to connect a song with a concept. And it's kind of funny because there were a lot of religious tones in Yesteryear, but I think the song that represents Yesteryear to me is Paint the Town Red by Doja Cat, because it really was about how she would do anything and even go against her values, really, truly, the ones she said she valued, for fame, for attention, for approval, for money. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on creativity, on Yesteryear, and I look forward to connecting with you in the next video. Bye.